So go ahead and open your eyes if you've closed them. And did you notice your mind going off at all? Any times? Mine only went off 20 or 30 times during that minute. I thought about how long should I do this? There are people on a camera somewhere else. I don't know if they'll want to sit there silently for a minute or two. And oh, what am I going to say next? So, you know, that voice, we all can recognize it, right? Sometimes we don't recognize, though, how central it is to creating our sense of stress in our lives. That voice that registers the future problems, and we start to carry them now instead of when they're actually here. All the problems from the past, all the regrets that we can bring back into the present, all that all at once, it can be a lot. But if we can let that go for a minute, I think we recognize that this moment's not so bad. We can probably deal with this moment. And what is our life but one moment following upon another moment? And you know, you've got this far, you'll probably get quite a bit further. And mindfulness, then, as we develop it as a basic way of being in our world, in our lives, we can start to notice more what we're doing with ourselves and with our minds during the day. Are we really investing that brilliant consciousness on the things that make the most difference to us? Or is it, you know, really mundane things? The me train. I call it the me train here. This idea that we have to be certain kinds of people and we have to have certain kinds of things to be okay. All that stuff we accumulate around us that gives us our sense of our identity. You know, that can be very burdensome as well. So we can use this mindfulness also to notice when we're not exhibiting these virtuous qualities that we all would aspire to, right? We want to be the best we can. We want to provide service to others, be helpful and good. But sometimes we don't. We're not that. And so mindfulness allows us to notice when we're going down the wrong path and to say, wait a minute, that's not what I want in my life. Without mindfulness, though, we could be all the way down the road before we know it. Lost. So we can use this mindfulness to say, wait a minute, I don't want to be in an angry state right now. I don't want to be in a stress state right now. What can I do to shift gears? So these are some attitudes we talk about in the mindfulness program. Non-judging, patience, beginner's mind. Trust, non-striving, acceptance, and letting go. Now, whenever we talk about this in the program, people all say, oh, you know, these are things that we don't generally get much support for in our culture, right? We're supposed to be real critical, judging people. We're supposed to get things done. We're supposed to know a lot. But if you want stress in your life, just turn these around. Become judgmental, impatient, know-it-all, paranoid or distrustful, striving, rejecting and grasping. Just think about those words and what it's like to live a life characterized by those qualities. It's a pretty tough way to go with this one. Say, okay, beginner's mind is the idea of trying to be aware of our pre-existing prejudices and see things more freshly. So there's an old story that's often told about the academic who goes to see a Zen master. This is a classic story, so I'll share it with you. And the academic comes to meet the Zen master, and the Zen master starts pouring tea in the formal, ritualized way that is done. And the academic can't stop talking about what he knows about Zen and about Buddhism. And so the Zen master's pouring the tea, and the cup overflows, and pretty soon the academic says, "Stop, you idiot, can't you see? The cup is overflowing." And so the moral of the story, well, you're so full of it, your own ideas, how am I going to teach you anything? And we're like that too. You know, men especially, I think, are encouraged. You have to know everything. You have to be an expert on everything. It's kind of like a proxy measure of how good we are as human beings. But the problem with knowing it all is you're not open to anything new learning. And so beginner's mind is a way of trying to see things freshly. You know how a child is on the playground? They're amazed by the simplest thing. We can rediscover that, sometimes by paying attention, because often what happens is maybe we're in the presence of something amazing and beautiful, like all you people here. But if I have you put into just some category, prostate cancer patients, what do I see? I'm missing so much. And so this beginner's mind is trying to strip away all the preconceptions. And as much as possible, we can't do it absolutely, right? But at least we can do is start to be more aware of our labeling process and how that shapes what we see. Because once we think we know it all, we're missing so much. Instead of seeing clearly, we're imposing our ideas on what's actually happening. So we could go on with each of these and discuss each of them. I won't do that here and now because it will take quite a while, but they are discussed in all the books on mindfulness. So we encourage people to try this out. Catch yourself when you're being judgmental, about other people. It's so easy to find people lacking, right? We have ideas about how people should be, and pretty soon we label them and we don't see them as full, complete human beings anymore. We don't want to let that short-circuit our possibilities for discovering things about people that might be very valuable to us. Patience. Things take time to unfold. A lot of things that are worthwhile, they're not instantaneous. Right? Everyone knows that. Mature people know that. There was a famous study that was done, I think, in Brazil and then replicated at Stanford, where they gave children a piece of candy and said, if you don't eat this candy in the next, I think it was 15 minutes, I'll come back and give you another piece. And so the camera watched the children, like some of them were salivating and you could see them fighting not to grab the candy. And they followed up on the children many years later, and those children that were able to exhibit that restraint were much more successful in all the conventional ways of measuring that later on. So the ability to recognize the impulse but not act upon it is a sign of maturity. Okay, so I will be tempted to go through all of these, but I'm going to leave that for now. So we ask people to try on these attitudes. Again, you might not get, I don't know, maybe you will, but if you read the How to Get Ahead in Corporate World, they probably won't tell you these things. But if you want to get ahead in inner peace, if you want to get ahead in relating to other human beings in a caring, compassionate way, these things might prove useful to you. Another thing about this mindfulness and also mind training is the idea of turning towards rather than away from what is difficult. So often we want to avoid what's difficult. What happens though? That deprives us of the opportunity for certain learning to occur. So this is a Tibetan prayer. I take it on the word of Jack Kornfield, who wrote a book called A Path with Heart, which is about loving kindness practice. Grant that I may be given appropriate difficulties and sufferings on this journey so that my heart can be truly awakened and my practice of liberation and universal compassion may be truly fulfilled. Grant me appropriate difficulties. So a recognition that difficulties in life can be a kind of a leavening factor that develops our most important qualities, the ability to be empathic, to understand suffering, to display compassion and caring for others. These things happen more easily for those that have experienced suffering themselves and understand what it means. So we don't want to run away from those experiences. Here, from closer to home, the epitaph of Robert Kennedy after Aeschylus, Greek, I think he was a philosopher. In our sleep, pain which cannot forget falls drop by drop upon the heart until, in our own despair against our will, comes wisdom through the awful grace of God. So we're encouraged not to just pursue after the things we think are delightful and tasty, but also to encompass the whole of our lives, which includes, inevitably, illness, suffering, loss, and death. Here from a Christian mystic, contemplative, Thomas Merton. The whole idea of compassion is based on a keen awareness of the interdependence of all these living beings, which are all part of one another and all involved in one another. So again, this relates to that getting out of our own little bubble of our own little heads sometimes and recognizing the interdependence of all of us. None of us are autonomous, ultimately. Here, again, a Western scientist. Some of you may be familiar with this quotation from Albert Einstein. A human being is part of a whole called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. This is before women's liberation. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. So this is related to this idea of transcendence a little bit. Transcendence of our own miserable self-concept and the limitations that we impose on ourselves, to see more broadly, more wisely, more integratively the true nature of our lives. And so I'm going to pause now and invite questions if you have any. I don't know how long we were supposed to go, Stuart, but questions. But do you feel you have a basic sense of what this mindfulness is about? It's about a lot more than that. This is like basic mindfulness.
Describe your 8-week course.
Okay, the 8-week course involves mostly it's learning the applications of mindfulness to stress and stress reduction. So this idea of events happen in our life, how does it turn into stress in our body? It's not a given. We know that a certain event could be very stressful to another person and stressful in a negative way, corrosive way, whereas another person it would mean nothing to. What's the difference? We're basically physiologically almost the same, right? It's what's happening up here. Happiness is a inside job, I guess some people say. And same with stress. Stress is an inside job. It's how we interpret the experience that creates the degree of stress we experience. When we perceive a threat, and it could be a very real threat like an illness or a sea train bearing down on us because the bar didn't go down in time. So some threats don't take a lot of interpretation, but most of the things that really get to us, our day-to-day lives, the stress of our day-to-day living, most of it's really up here. It's not the actual event, it's how we interpret it. So a lot of the mindfulness as it relates to stress has us be aware of how we're transducing that experience into the stress in our own bodies, how we're activating that fight or flight response. Everybody hear about that, the fight or flight stress response? Triggered by the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis in the center of our brains, turns on all the stress hormones, makes us strong, lets grandmothers pick up trucks that are on babies and stuff like that. Those kind of stories make the newspaper. That's the fight or flight response. It's a charged state of being, but it can become almost a way of living if we're very stressed. And our bodies aren't made for that, always living in high gear like that. So that 8-week course is learning how to recognize those factors and modulate them so that we don't live in a stressful world all the time, because a lot of it's up to us. I got a cough, just a sec. So each class begins with some teaching. It could be those attitudes we talked about, or it could be about neurobiology, how experience changes our brains. Did you know that? When I was a kid, they said your brain stopped at a certain age and it never changed, and now we know it's not true. The way we use our brains actually changes the connections in our brain, and especially in that HPA part of the brain that's like the main circuit board. We can establish new connections. So for people that have a long-term problem with depression or worry or anxiety, it kind of becomes almost hardwired. It's not quite, but it's modifiable through experience. So if we can learn to notice the triggers, notice our initial impulse towards our habitual reaction, but say, wait a minute, take a step back, take a breath, we have the ability to calm ourselves if we have the skills. It's not that hard. That part's easy. We can teach a person to stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is that, have you ever been on a vacation somewhere that was, everything was perfect, perfect weather, you felt that you left your troubles behind, and it feels so different in the body, right? But that's always with us. We just have to know how to press the right buttons. And they're all up here. So we learn how to do that in that 8-week course.